So friends, this is a bit of an experiment about how can we kind of do things here in Windsor Green, host events that kind of travel all around the world. I know there's people from Australia listening today, all kinds of people in America. We're zooming in, Shane from America later on. So we're going to try and see if we can do it. For those who don't know me, so I'm Ash Barker. I'm the minister here at Lodge Road United Reformed Church, and I also lead Seedbeds, which is about growing leaders and communities to the fullness of life. We just believe every neighbourhood, every local community should be able to flourish in God's love and shalom. And there are so many places that are missing out, but the reason, what we try to do to see that happen is raise up local leaders, local community leaders. And so we run changemakers programs, masters programs, incubators, anything that will kind of help local people come together and see their dreams happen. Change comes best from the grassroots up rather than top down off the outside in. So that's what we try to do. So it's a pleasure to be able to partner with Red Letter Christians. I was one of the people who kind of helped get it here in the UK with others, and it's great to see, even under the duress of lockdown, that so much kind of happened. And so I'm really thrilled that Danielle is able to come and share tonight her experiences of sustainable leadership in difficult places and difficult times. If anyone knows that, Danielle is an expert, and I'm thrilled that she can come. And then we'll have some Q&A. So think about what you'd like to ask someone like Danielle, who has so much experience, not as a pastor of an inclusive church. She's also been an editor and a communicator with, I want to say,
maybe don't say.
A large mission agency, a large evangelical agency, which shall not be named. And of course now, as well, leading Red Letter Christians. So please welcome Danielle. Please give a big applause.
Thanks, Ash. Ash and Angie have been really important in my life, and I know in lots of your lives here. They've been the people who've occasionally been like, let's just do it, when I needed to hear let's just do it, to try new things, to try crazy things, to try stuff that doesn't work, to try stuff that does work. So I'm really thankful for them in my life. So I'm going to share, it's quite a personal talk really, this. It's not very academic or like, you know, it's just a kind of a where I'm at the minute in terms of my own leadership. And I don't think you can talk about leadership outside of the context of who you are and what's going on in your life. So I'm going to share a little bit about like who I am and what's been going on with me and how that's impacted how I lead. But I'm going to start out with this quote from, there's an author called Shane and Danielle, and she's a pastor as well. I'm going to read it twice because pretty much this is the sum total of what I'm going to say. What kills a soul? Exhaustion, secret keeping, image management. And what brings a soul back to life? Honesty, connection, grace. So I'm just going to read that again, slower. What kills a soul? Exhaustion, secret keeping, image management. And what brings the soul back from the dead? Honesty, connection, grace. So if you just hold that in your head and you don't hear anything else, that's probably fine. So I think the last couple of days as I've been sitting and thinking about what I wanted to share with you, it's almost been like a little mini retreat for me as I've looked back over some of my different experiences of leadership over the last number of years, and particularly my last couple of years as a pastor, what I've learned through that, what's hurt, what I've really failed at, what I've gotten right, what I've struggled with about my own identity in the midst of these things. And so I'm going to share a little bit about that, but I'll introduce myself. Ash did a really good job and said nice things, so that was good. So currently I'm married to Joel, been married for 22 years. I'm American, you can probably hear that, shocker. So I've been in the UK for 23 years, so I've been almost half of my life, not quite half of my life in this country, so I don't really feel American in the same way anymore. I probably feel more British than I do American, despite the accent. And I've got 2 British kids. One's 16, just turned 16. And one is 5. So I've got a huge age gap. And 2 completely, utterly different personalities of people that you couldn't possibly imagine. They have like the same face, but the older one is like the most introverted, quiet, sweet, soft-spoken one, and the little one is just a terror. She's into like gothic stuff, and she likes stories about blood and guts and things like that. So they bring a lot to our lives. And my husband, Joel, and I, we've always been real partners in everything, like in life, in work, in ministry, and how we've had, used our home and our family, and that continues to be like an amazing strength and partner to me. So currently, as Ash said, I've got 2 roles. My main job, my day job, most of my time is as a minister of an inclusive church. It's a Methodist kind of fresh expression church, if you're familiar with that kind of an idea. And the idea behind it is a church that is built on pursuing radical inclusion. And when we say radical inclusion, what we mean is our whole way of being is centered on who's left out and how do we limit the barriers to who's left out. So consequently, a lot of the folks that come are, I'd say we're like 80-90% LGBTQ+. There's a lot of folks who would identify as neurodiverse. And we really concentrate on creating welcome for those types of folks, but also thinking about how we think about race, and what are we answering the tough questions about gender, like all of these things that hopefully are tools toward us becoming more and more like Jesus by creating more of a space of love for one another. Red Letter Christians really slots nicely into that because it's about love as well, and Jesus and justice. And so lots of times I see this kind of synergy between my work with church and my synergy with work with Red Letter Christians. And a lot of that is, over the past couple of years, we've had lots of chops and changes, and we've had a pandemic, and so some of the ways that we thought we might go, we kind of took another little direction. But a lot of what Red Letter Christians does is we aim to connect people that are doing this work of Jesus and justice in their communities around the UK and in the world. And what I recognize in our community as Red Letter Christians is really similar to some of the stuff that I see in church life, which is people want to be known. They want to meet people that get them. They want to be on a journey with folks that might live in a different kind of a context. They might have experienced being excluded from stuff in a different kind of way, but there is this kind of soul connection. And for lots of us also, this idea that we really need grace, and we need love, and we need to recognize that God's grace is for us, particularly as folks who see ourselves as leaders in lots of different contexts. God's grace is for us as much as it's for the people that we're giving grace to in our lives. And so I think that is a fundamental thing that's come through our work in both areas. And a lot of what we've done the last couple of years, particularly in the pandemic, with Red Letter Christians being online and stuff, is focusing on spiritual resilience as practice, because people are tired. You're probably tired. You're probably sitting here tired. Loads of things going on in your lives. There's loads of things going on in people's lives that's hard. Our family life has taken a real hit through COVID, and our kids have struggled in different ways, and that impacts on everything. But it's focusing on how we build spiritual resilience, connection with God, and that focus on grace, and recognizing that even if I don't achieve all my goals today, I'm still infinitely loved by God in a way that can't be changed. So we alluded to the organization that shall not be named. Actually, it's not terrible. They were lovely people, and I worked for many, many years with this evangelical missions organization. But it was quite a different experience of leadership for me. It was kind of like corporate style leadership with strategic planning and like really high level management kind of stuff, which I appreciated and met some wonderful people and learned loads. But it was a very different environment than just kind of being in a community, connecting with people, learning and growing together. And I realized, like, going back to kind of my early early years of leading in that kind of a way, in my late 20s, I was around a lot of leaders who, for lack of a better word, quite stereotypical male leaders. There were, aggressive might not be the right word, but it's kind of almost this kind of, what's that? Domineering. Yeah, but there's entitled. Yeah. Again, really, really lovely people in a lot of ways, but I think what I recognized as a new leader was, as a young woman, I felt this pressure to be male, to be aggressive in the same sort of ways, and you start to recognize that, oh, I'm going to get this person's respect if I kind of get up in their face and I'm, challenge them, and then they're going to be like, oh yeah, she's okay. And you're like, you had to get in there with the boys. And I realized that's really, really not me. And
welcome.
Oh,
Waiting to
to you as
connect
well.
to Bluetooth device.
Kind of a anyway, so that's throwing me a little bit there. So I also had like lots of things going on in my home, and it was like I had these kind of parallel lives of ministry with like real people, hanging out with real people in my house, loving people, cooking them food, and then this kind of corporate Christian thing. And equally, my perspectives on lots of different elements of spirituality were evolving and changing, and I felt like this disintegrated person, somebody who's not the same in every context. I don't know if you've had that experience. Maybe you've had that experience where like you're around a
Waiting
certain
to
friend.
connect to Bluetooth device.
Maybe we need to turn that off. You come around a certain friend, and that friend brings out a character in you that you don't like. It was that kind of an experience. Well, I think as a leader, as I've grown, and as a person, as a human, as a mom, as a wife, I think I was contemplating this week how I am probably the most integrated of a person that I've been in my life. Like, I feel like there's not this huge gap between if I met you in one context or I met you in another. If I speak to you as a pastor, if I speak to you as a mom at the school gate. Like, I'm the most myself of any time I've ever been. And so a lot of this is about resilience. And, if I'm struggling with resilience in my leadership, I'm also struggling with resilience in my family and in my marriage. And, and there's all sorts of things that affect that ability to be resilient. One of the things that I think is important to know about me, and I try to be open about, is that I struggle with my mental health. And it's come in different seasons over time. So when I first moved to the UK about 23 years ago, I had a really long, difficult bout of depression. A lot of it was cross-cultural stress and missing home and things like that. And it was a season of about 1.5 years that was one of the hardest times of my life, and it lifted. And mostly it was okay, and then I had a second child a little over 5 years ago, and postpartum depression hit. And I have to be honest, it hasn't completely lifted, and kind of into another phase of life where that's something that I wrestle with in a more ongoing way. So those are things that impact me in every area of my life, including my leadership. One of the things, I wanted to tell a little story of an experience that put me kind of on the journey, what I'm talking to you about today. When I was going back again to like my late 20s, I went back to visit my home church in America, and I was asked to speak at a women's event. It was after my first bout of depression. And there was a lot of pressure to kind of be the perfect Christian speaker. Even though I was young, people look up to you and you can feel that, and it was that pressure. And I said to someone, I'm gonna just tell them that I'm doing really badly. I'm just gonna tell them I've been depressed. And they're like, no, you can't do that. You can't do that, you're gonna disappoint people. And I felt like from God that the thing that I needed to do in that moment was to be like, I'm depressed, and this has been really, really tough. And as I shared with this group of women who were like my mom's age, I looked around the room and I could see people crying. because it was they weren't expecting to come in and hear a Christian speaker speak and hear them say, yeah, like, I really struggled with, negative thoughts and suicidal thoughts, and I didn't want to be here. They weren't expecting for someone to share that kind of level of experience with them. And that really hit me as a woman, that's particularly important. To those women it was important. And it struck me that it's important to me as a human to not be somebody that tries to maintain that image of being on a pedestal. It does nobody any good, least of all me, for people to think that I'm perfect and that I've got everything all together. And so I'd like to say that was like way back in like 2002, and then from then I had everything sorted out. I really didn't. There's been a lot of wrestling with my identity and what it looks like to bring my full self to leadership since then. There's a few things I just wanted to share with you about self-care, relational care, and spiritual care. So I think resilient leadership, resilient living, discipleship is kind of a dance. It's not really like there's not this formula. If you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to have it all together. I think it is kind of like this dance between all these different areas of our lives. And some of it is about who we are as a person in terms of our health and our physicality and our brains. Some of it's about how our relationships are going. Some of it's about developing spiritual practices that help to guide us through life. Some of it's about having good boundaries with the people around us. And it's usually a dance of all those things together that can create someone that is flourishing. And for me, I think I recognized that I went from being somebody who was like quite ashamed that, like that impostor syndrome thing. Do you know what I mean by impostor syndrome? Where you think, nobody knows that I'm not really this person that they think that I am, to thinking actually nobody's that person. Nobody has it all together. And so, so just being somebody that needs to be open about all of these different areas of my life. And I wanted to share, so let me see. When we meet together as a church community, one of the things that we always share is this blessing at the end of our time every week. And we say, may we live fully, may we love wastefully, and may we have the courage to be all that God has created us to be. And for me, like the questions are, who am I? Who am I created to be? What do I bring to this role? What do I bring to my life? And when I'm living as the healthiest, fullest version of myself, who am I created to be? And I think for me, the things that are the most important as a leader, as a human, are to be honest, to be reflective about the things that I do, to be really open to input from other people, to be warm with others and empathetic, to be willing to lament with other people that are suffering and that are sad, to rejoice with people when they're happy. And I love, like Ashley and Angie were mentioning, like helping people to develop into who they're meant to be as well. And when at my core, like I feel most full of joy when I'm sitting with someone, chatting with them about the things that give them joy, and think about ways that they can grow into the fullness of their potential in our community or somewhere else. And equally, when I'm not doing well emotionally, like this week, I've not been having a great mental health week, I recognize that I struggle to do that very thing that I love and that I know is so important. So yeah, I've been kind of sitting with some of these thoughts this week and recognizing what's true about me, and that, part of this journey toward like a fullness of leadership is recognizing my womanhood and how I lead as a woman and what that means for me, and that some of the systems of, the word patriarchy, the patriarchy that's out there, want to kind of war against some of the things that are what I actually bring to the table. And I think as I've been, because I grew up in a more evangelical kind of an environment where there was less of excitement about women being ministers. It was something that I didn't even think would be open to me as a woman. And I realized, even though I'm somebody who's had leadership positions in Christian contexts, there was stuff that felt like closed doors. And now that I'm in an environment where I'm leading a church, I'm like, it's so obvious to me that this was something that I'm created to do, but I didn't see it because of all these systems around me that would say that these kind of feminine characteristics that I bring are not part of what it means to be a leader in this context. So I just thought I'd share with you a few of the things that I feel like I need to thrive. And one of them is recognizing, I don't know how long I've been talking, Ash, how am I doing?
You're doing great.
Okay. One of the things I think a lot about is dialogue, conversation. And there's a theologian called Stephen Bevins, who actually Ash had come speak a few years ago, who writes a lot about prophetic dialogue and this idea of God being dialogical in nature, God being about conversation. Conversation within God himself, conversation with human beings, and that kind of process of give and take is really, really important in how God relates to God's self, but also how God relates to us. God doesn't need to include us in the things that God does, but chooses to include us. And for me, that kind of frames how I think about a lot of leadership is conversation with people. I don't have everything figured out, just because it might say pastor behind my name. Most of the wonder and the good stuff comes out of conversation with people and hearing multiple different perspectives of what's going on and seeing those gifts and those skills rise to the surface. And for me, a part of that too is who are we willing to learn from? Do we have this whole criteria system where you only take advice from somebody that's got something behind the name, or are we heavily curating who we're willing to learn from? Are we willing to speak the truth to people that have power? Are we willing to give our power away if we have it in whatever context we have it? So I've a few things that I wanted to share also are just that I recognize I moved from a space where I thought spiritual resilience was me alone in a room with God, searching my darkness of my soul, pulling out all the horrible things, to realizing that the ways that I grow most as a human being and the ways that I grow most as a leader, as a spiritual being, are in community with other people, when I'm really known by other people and they really know me. It's interaction, it's recognizing who I am, what I bring to the table, but it's also being willing to just invite people to see me as I truly am. For me, one of the things that I know I really need is space to think, space to pray, but I'll be really honest, I'm really not the person that gets up at 6 o'clock in the morning to go pray and read, and I've never been great at that. But I recognize that throughout my day, I need to create space of silence. That's something I really thrive on, is getting input from lots of people, getting input from God, and then sit in with it. And I think somehow God works in those moments of being able to kind of see the synergy between what different people are saying and listening for God's voice in the midst of that, and for my direction, for the directions of the communities that I'm part of. And when I don't have time and space to think and pause, when I'm pushed to move too quickly, things fall apart for me. And that's one of those observations that's come over years of not doing that right and being rushed into doing things that are not, that I haven't had enough time to consider. It's also really, like I've said, it's really important for me to be honest with people. For a long time, I worked kind of under other people, where I alluded to some of that earlier, where quite often I'd be asked to do stuff that I didn't think was a good idea. So you have to kind of wrestle as a follower with what you do with that. And I realized that the only way I can cope in those kinds of scenarios is by saying things like, I will do what you say, but I will have to tell you that I think this is a better way. I will help you do your way if if that's what you want to continue doing. Like I've had to develop these ways of coping in those kinds of scenarios where I can feel like I can be authentically myself. And I think because I've experienced being on the other end of that, of being asked to do stuff that doesn't feel right, it's made me much more willing to listen and sit with different perspectives of people that I'm part of helping to lead. I also realized that I'm the kind of person that can feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders. I feel things very deeply, and I also feel quite bad if I can't meet everybody's needs around me. Like in the pandemic, I spent a little while feeling like I was a bit of a failure because I couldn't meet all the needs that were going on, but I had some time with God, time to think, and I felt like the direction of that was for God to give me a clear focus on what I was meant to do in that period of time in a clear direction. And I think, we can trust that God kind of draws all of these things together, that God is at work in the lives of people around us, and quite often the people that are working against injustice are drawn together, and that they're able to address different areas of things that are interconnected, even if expertise might go into different areas. I could probably keep talking at you for a while, but I think I've probably talked for my allotted amount of time. I think I'll just finish there. Is there?
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's have that. Sorry.
Sorry.
Here, we've got a little bit of time before Shane comes, and so we thought just to do a bit of Q&A. So my question, I think, listening to you and the resilience kind of story of what you've been able to overcome, that you're here and being able to lead so many great things. What is it? Because lots of people haven't. Like lots of people, hard things come and they just can't kind of make it through. What is it that for those of us who are struggling, what are some of the things? I'm hearing self-awareness, I'm hearing trying to get perspective, but are there some kind of tips for us about, that we should be really taking seriously, that maybe you didn't before that you are now, or something?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the major things for me is having a little team and not being on my own. So even in the context of my church leadership, I think one of the things I didn't have before was I felt like everything was on me, and if I didn't hold all the plates in the air and they fell to the ground, the world would end. Whereas now I'm really surrounded with multiple levels of people that care for me and lift me up. And so I've got a pastoral supervisor. I didn't even know that term before, which is somebody who I basically talk through my caseload, if you want to use that term. I've got somebody I can call day or night with safeguarding questions, and that will help me talk through it. I think what has been the most soul destroying is when I feel like I need to hold the weight of everybody's pain myself. And you can say all you want, you hand it over to God, but unless you're doing that in concert with other people, I just don't think you can sustain life over the long term. I think too, I've got a coach that I meet with once a month who's like separate from my context, who I can talk through bigger stuff with, and I've got a leadership team. And I'm just really, really blessed more than any time ever in my life to have people that are around me that love me and constantly are like, take today off, or like, take a rest. And I don't feel that pressure to produce, like I know that I'm loved, and I do have grace from those people. The other thing I would say is, I don't know if you've heard of this term, the drama triangle. So the drama triangle is, I think it was like an acting term. So it's like people that create drama. There's usually a victim, a villain, and a rescuer. And quite often what happens in, well, certainly in church contexts, is that the leader can become the rescuer to somebody who wants who needs a rescuer, or thinks they need a rescuer. But that triangle can flip really easily, and overnight you can become the villain who is the enemy of all good things. And what I recognized in a couple of years of pastoral ministry is that happens partly because I make it about me. You know, partly because I developed this like relationship with somebody who I really want to save them, and you know, I feel like I'm the answer to their prayer. I mean, I probably don't think it in those words at the time, but when I don't have community that's sharing that with people, it's really a disservice to that person to feel like, because that you're just going to create that cycle that flips. And I'm really committed to this idea of collaborative leadership and not having this like superstar pastor that you know everything has to go through. And I think leadership that's spread out and shared, where you draw people's ideas across a wide range of experiences, is the way that you can combat some of that stuff. Yeah.
Questions from the room? Also, we're saying
Shane,
I have
yeah?
been asking the Facebook folk as well if they've got questions.
Okay.
So if you're on Facebook, please put it in the chat and I can ask them again. Questions from the room?
First of all, Danielle, thank you so much for sharing about your leadership. Full disclosure, I attend IGB, and it's wonderful. But I just wanted to say how much it means to me, also coming from a conservative evangelical background, hearing a woman in leadership be honest about her own experiences. And I guess the thing I'm most sorry about is that, you know, the other person speaking tonight, Shane, wasn't here to hear all that. Because I feel
Sorry,
like...
he is
Is he
here.
listening?
Oh, he is? Is he listening now?
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
Hi, Shane.
okay, great. Okay, good. I didn't know he was listening. That's great. So, anyway, yeah, I guess the thing, I think you kind of touched on this, but when you're talking about spiritual resilience, part of me is wondering, do we tend to focus on spiritual resilience, or what are your thoughts about, like, is spiritual resilience what we focus on instead of giving proper support to people in leadership? Because it seems like if there's enough support, there would be less need to be like, oh, that person's so resilient.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think that can happen. I think that can almost be a weapon against people. But I think you need, I wrote it down somewhere here. It was from an article that I read. Hang on a second. Maybe I didn't. But it's this thing that, you know, you've got the different strands of what makes somebody flourishing and healthy. You've got your personal spiritual practices and life, and you know, you have to take responsibility for yourself as a person. But if you don't have structures in place that are protecting your community, that are protecting you as a leader, then the personal, no matter how resilient you are, if you don't have good safeguarding practices in place, if you don't have people sharing the load of leadership, if you don't have people that you will take feedback from, ultimately you are going to crash. There's only, resilience can only go so far. But to me, that's creating a culture of resilience around people, around leaders, but around everybody.
It's a question from the Zoom, from the Facebook Live. What helps with spiritual resilience? Boundaries, spiritual disciplines? Can you talk a bit more on this?
Oh gosh.
Kathy.
Yeah. Hi, Kathy. I know Kathy. Yeah, boundaries, I think. The spiritual practices for sure. And in fact, we've done a whole retreat recently on spiritual practices that are Christians, and a lot of the resources are online. You can have a look at some of those. I think for me, boundaries is the really difficult thing. That's the other kind of piece of the puzzle, is how you aren't working on empty all the time. And I've had a number of different experiences recently with, you know, that drama triangle thing, where I got myself into situations where I had to create a firmer boundary with somebody, and it feels really awful. Do you feel like, you know, I'm a Christian, I'm a leader, I'm meant to pour myself out, and part of me really wants to do that, but I can only pour what's in the bottle, you know. And so there's been times where I've had to make decisions recently to protect myself, to protect my family. Some of it's sometimes about physical safety, some of it is about, like, my kids not doing well and not being able to have people in the home for a stretch of time. There's seasons of life for things. And I think, you know, I think about the dear people in Ukraine that are now, you know, don't have a choice whether they're pouring themselves out every day they are. I think they're, you know, but if we operate like that all the time, how do you do it? And I kind of think there has to be something that builds in us, that, you know, allowing the Spirit to work in those times when we have no choice and we have to let God rise to meet us in the midst of that kind of struggle and suffering. But if we don't, can we create, when we can, environments where we can thrive and where we can share the load and we can build the resilience in our communities to be able to sustain times like that if and when they come. Yeah.
Excellent. Maybe time for one more question.
I've answered them all.
Okay. I've got one more.
Yeah.
You're leading Red Letter Christians in the UK. What are your hopes for Red Letter Christians going forward?
What are my hopes for Red Letter Christians? I feel like we've kind of been responsive in the pandemic, and we've focused a lot on putting out good content and taking a lot of the kind of infrastructure role of, just creating opportunities for people to share their experience. But I'd love there to be a greater breadth and diversity of leadership across the UK that can take some of that infrastructure stuff, keep it going, but also just to hear more voices, more varied voices from our queer folks, from people from all different kind of races and backgrounds, and so that would be my big hope. Yeah.
Thank you, Danielle. Grateful you could make the time. Shane, you've been an inspiration to so many of us, and we're so thrilled that you're able to come and talk. Can you, just before you kind of get into what you have to share with us, can you tell us a little bit how Red Letters started and how you got involved? And you and Tony and others were really instrumental in helping getting Red Letters happening. But could you give us a little bit of background to that?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, it's really great to be a part of this, and this is part of our charm, is not having everything too fine-tuned, and so all those listening in know that we can use as much resources as we can as they can muster up. But I love the raw kind of honest feel, and I'm grateful for what Danielle shared. So I've been on the north side of Philadelphia here for the last 25 years or so. In fact, I'll show you a little across the street. There is you may not be able to see it, but that's our community center where we started the Simple Way. And the work here locally is a big part of my passion. Just the last hour I've been going in abandoned houses that will be taking over and turning into homes for families that need them. And we've got community gardens going across the street and food getting given out. So it's all that. And then, a bunch of years into this, we realized that I think it is particularly here in the US that the evangelical church, and even really the larger church, has a bit of a spiritual crisis on our hands. We are often known for things that Jesus was not known for. we don't have the best reputation, and I think that really one place that became clear was when the Barna Research Group went to every state in the U.S. a few years ago. And they asked young non-Christians, what do you think of when you hear the word Christian? The number one answer was anti-gay, anti-homosexual. Number two was judgmental. And number three was hypocritical. So that's not what we want to be known for. It's not what Jesus was known for. And what, really broke my heart was that what didn't even make the list was love. The thing that Jesus said, they will know that you are mine by your love. So what we began to realize is that we can't just have these kind of voices that are voices in the wilderness on their own, but we need to change the narrative. And the way that you change the narrative is by changing the narrators. And we realize that some of the loudest voices in the public eye representing Christianity aren't always the most beautiful or the most loving or the most faithful voices. And so we want to amplify versions of Christianity that look like love and that look like Jesus and that have their feet on the ground in real neighborhoods, that are working on justice issues. And so we got our name, as a lot of you know, but some of you may not. a good friend of ours, Jim Wallace, was being interviewed by a radio DJ in Tennessee, which is my home state, which where we have country music. Elvis's house is in Tennessee. You know, Dolly Parton's from Tennessee. So this guy was a country music DJ. But it was also interesting because he said to Jim, you know, he didn't seem to have much to do with Christianity, but he said, I've read the Bible, read a lot of it, and there's parts of it that I love. There's other parts of it that I find pretty confusing, you know, if I'm honest, even kind of troubling. And he said, but I've always liked the stuff in red. And he's referring to the Bibles that, you know, illuminate the words of Jesus in red. And he said, you guys seem to be about the red letters. You should call yourselves red letter Christians, and that would distinguish you from all the other, you know, kind of not so red letter versions of Christianity. And of course, you know, Gandhi, when he was asked about Christianity, he said, I love Jesus. I just wish the Christians acted more like him. So that's what we started this thing 10 years ago, and it started with Tony Campolo and Jim Wallace and a bunch of folks that are kind of a generation before me. And a lot of us are speakers and writers, but now we've branched out much more broadly than that, just to include, you know, folks that don't write books and folks that are, you know, doing really great stuff in their neighborhoods. And there's musicians that are a part of it. There's, you know, these micro businesses that Angie and Ash have been a part of, and, you know, all kinds of stuff. So at the center of everything is Jesus. And I think ironically, that's what we came to find in the US here, is that the best corrective for what's gone wrong in evangelicalism is Jesus. You know, and when ironically, a lot of people are leaving the church, but it's often a version of Christianity that has decentered Jesus and is concerned about all kinds of things that Jesus wasn't concerned about, and isn't concerned about the things that Jesus was very passionate about. So we like to say that we're aspiring to live as if Jesus meant the things he said. That's our aspiration. And, you know, we fall short of that plenty of the time, but we're that's what we're going for.
A little bit on on resilience and discipleship, and particularly around leading in difficult times.
Yeah, so I'll share just a little bit. I mean, there's Danielle said so many, you know, beautiful treasures and nuggets of wisdom there. And I don't have this like scripted. I got the sense that this is much more, you know, speak from your heart. And so I got my little scrap notes here. But a few thoughts on resilience are, one, that it's been very important to me to have my feet on the ground in a real neighborhood, relationships with real people. And there's a lot of folks that, you know, Mother Teresa had a wonderful line. She said, it can be very fashionable to talk about the poor, but is not as fashionable to talk with them. You know, and so the model of Jesus is not just a God that cared about the poor from a distance, but a God who came embodied in a brown-skinned Palestinian, Jewish, refugee, homeless, born in a manger, came from a town where nothing good could come, Nazareth. So that embodiment is, you know, is God, I think, really moving in among us. And that call to move near to the suffering of the world, near to the pain of the world, is part of what puts the fire in my bones and keeps the fire in my bones for justice, and keeps my love for Jesus, my dependence on Jesus, you know, there every day. Because it's also the relationships that are tiring. And ironically, the same stuff that gives us life can also take life. And so I think, you know, one of the other elements of this that's been so important for my own, you know, sustainability is doing it in community, doing this, you know, work with other people. And I believe, you know, when it comes to resilience, community is one of the most important things. And we're wired for community, but we often try to do things by ourselves. And I think that community, I would suggest, is about surrounding ourselves with people who remind us of the kind of person we want to be. They remind us of Jesus. We want to surround ourselves with folks that love like Jesus, that, leave off the fragrance of Jesus by their life. And so they rub off on us. And I think we all tend to become like the people we hang out with. And that's why, when you're a teenager, we're always told, the dangers of peer pressure. And while that can be true, I think there's also a counter truth about peer pressure, which is that we can move each other in really good ways. If you want to be more generous, hang out with generous people and they rub off on you. A part of how I've learned courage is by hanging out with courageous people. And I've been able to do a lot of things that I probably never would have had the courage to do on my own. Going to Iraq and the war and all the, some of the things that we do in our neighborhood, like the way that we get courage is by doing it together. And I think on the other side of that, if we hang out with people that are narcissistic and, watch reality TV all the time, then we become narcissistic. If we hang out with people that are cynical and that don't have much hope, that also is contagious. Fear is contagious, just like courage is. And so I think, that idea of being around a healthy community and a community, that doesn't mean it's perfect, but I think that we're aspiring towards the same things, that we want to be generous. We want to be loving. And when we fall short, we can catch each other, but there's a momentum together, right? That we can't maybe muster up on our own. So I think community is a part of that resilience. The other, a couple other thoughts are that I find, one of my mentors said, if we've all heard the cliche, if you give someone a fish, they'll eat for a day. If you teach them to fish, they'll eat for the rest of their life. But Dr. Perkins, who said that, he said, there's another part of it, which is we've got to do something about who owns the pond. Because we can be teaching people fish and we can be giving people fish, but if we don't have access to the pond, we're still missing a piece of the puzzle. And, Dr. King talked about how we're called to be the good Samaritan and lift our neighbor out of the ditch. But after you lift so many people out of the ditch, you start to think maybe we need to do something about the road to Jericho so that people don't keep ending up in the ditch. And I find that it can be very tiring to just respond to the victims of injustice without being a part of a movement that is trying to do something about the injustice to begin with. But it is a dance, because I know folks that are working on macro issues, that are lobbying for policy changes on immigration or gun violence or whatever those important issues are. And they're working in DC and they begin to burn out if they don't have a snowball fight with kids in the neighborhood, or hang out on the street, or just sit on the stoop with someone and listen to them pour out their heart. I think we're made for relationships. So our pursuit of justice has to keep its feet on the ground. But if we're only doing the work of responding to crisis after crisis without doing something about the systems and structures that are causing so much suffering, that also gets tiring. So, I think of my work in the neighborhood and our work within Red Letter Christians and the macro movement as kind of two blades of scissors. They really have to go together. And if I'm not marching in the streets and going to jail for injustice, things like that, like for countering injustice, like we start to get tired here. But if we're only kind of going from activism to activism event and not, just hanging out with kids and helping them with homework, that gets tiring too. And just a couple other thoughts are that I think we can also be very creative in how we channel our anger. Anger can be very overwhelming, but it can also, I think if anger is seasoned with love, it can be a very powerful force. And there are plenty of things that are worth being angry about. I mean, I came home and my neighbor was pointing out how there's a bullet hole in our house, because from the last time I was here until now, we now have a bullet hole and he was telling me about how that happened. That's messed up. right? That's worth being angry about. So what we're doing tomorrow is I've got a pile of guns here that have been taken off the street, and we're going to be chopping them up and melting them down and beating them into garden tools and making art out of them and listening to the stories of resilience of people who have survived gun violence, who have seen their friends killed. And we're going to channel all of that anger into transforming a piece of metal from, a gun into a garden tool. And I'll never forget one of my friends as she was beating on the gun. It was actually Sharon Risher, whose mother was killed in Emmanuel AME by Dylan Roof. This was a very historic African-American church and Wednesday night Bible study. And Dylan Roof came in and killed 9 people and terrorized and injured many others. And so she's beating on the gun, and she's naming all 9 of her family members and loved ones that were killed. And afterwards, she came up and she kind of collapsed in my arms. I'm holding her, and she said to me, she goes, "I'll tell you, something in my heart's healing." And she said, "Some of the things I thought of doing to Dylan Roof, I just took them all out on the barrel of that gun." So, I think there's something visceral about what protest can look like. And for me in the pandemic, I've needed something to do with my body, with my hands. And so blacksmithing has been literally a holy and spiritual practice. But one other example, just because I'm here in Philly, is we've got a lot of lives that are being lost to drug addiction. And it can feel very paralyzing. We find needles everywhere, heroin needles, and there was one particular time where one of the kids they were building a snowman. They were going to have a snowball fight. And one of the kids said, "We're kind of nervous though, because we're scared when we roll up the snow that we'll find a needle in it that's been buried in the snow that we didn't see." And we thought, that's messed up. That's really messed up that our kids have to think about that. And it was, after that, then a number of things happened, but we had a campaign called Need a Little Help. And this was prompted by the young people. And we put all those needles, these are just off of our street, and we put them in jars with the quotes from the kids. And we delivered these to our city officials, to our mayor and our health commissioner and, our city council members. And we said, we need a little help. And this is your bottle of needles, to show you that this is a public health crisis. And I think that's part of what we've got to do, is find ways that we can make people uncomfortable by injustice. And that's really what Dr. King said, is that we've got to expose injustice. So the urgency of it makes it impossible not to do something. And so, I think that's all, to me, a part of resilience is finding ways that we can keep turning up the volume of what's at stake, of the lives that are being lost. And the last thought I have on resilience is that it's very important for us to be surrounded by people who have been at this for a while. It's part of why I've loved doing Red Letter Christians with Tony. As here's someone that's almost 90 years old, that's been at it for a while, that even after his stroke has said he's, trying to write a book right now and thinking about running for Congress. and Tony always says, we're as young as our dreams and we're as old as our cynicism. And he often says, and even though I'm old in age, I'm younger than some of you, because your cynicism can be overwhelming. And so I think we need to be around people, especially this younger generation that's getting caught on fire for all the things that are wrong in the world, from the environment to violence and another war now, and all these things. Like, we need to be around some 90-year-olds. And one of my mentors is a 90-year-old nun here in Philly named Sister Margaret. And she's absolutely wild. And I can remember one of the times we got arrested. We've been arrested probably like at least 10 or 15 times together, and all for good things. And, some of those were sharing food with people when our city made it illegal. And that's the one I think that we were sentenced to citizenship training classes, where we had to go to class in order to be learn to be better law-abiding citizens. 80-year-old Catholic nun in these classes, and I'm thinking, man, that's what I want to be like when I'm 80 years old. And I think when people say, oh yeah, that activism, that intentional community living, it's such a wonderful phase of youth. When people say that, I'm like, you need to meet my friend Sister Margaret, because she's been in this phase of youthful idealism for about 60 or 70 years. And I think that those are some of the people whose shoulders we stand on, that are going to teach us what resilience can look like. So I only have a certain amount of credibility since I'm, 46 years old now, but Sister Margaret, who is still marching in the streets, still willing to go to jail, fighting injustice, still beating guns into garden tools, and probably will be there with us tomorrow. Like she's still an inspiration for me at 90 years old. So those are a few thoughts. I don't want to talk too much because I know we're going to have a conversation together, and I'm excited to hear you all respond more to Danielle, but it's just wonderful to be with you. Thanks.
Do you want me to